This is my true story. I raised my daughter with everything I had, cleaning floors and working long nights after my husband died, so she could live better than me. But when her wedding came, she looked at me with disgust. She told me I was too low class to meet her new in-laws, that I would ruin her image. Those words crushed me. After a lifetime of sacrifice, I was treated like dirt. But what she didn't know was that I carried her darkest secret. And I used it. Before I tell you how, comment where you're watching from and subscribe so my story can reach more people. When my husband passed away, I was left alone with a young daughter and no savings. Life was not kind, but I decided that my pain would not become hers. I took whatever work I could find, no matter how low it paid or how hard it was. I scrubbed floors in offices before sunrise, cleaned toilets in restaurants, and worked factory shifts where the air was so thick with dust that my lungs burned every night when I lay down. My hands grew rough and cracked from chemicals, my back bent from carrying loads, but I did it all with one thought in my mind. My daughter must never feel the hunger and shame I felt. There were nights I went to bed without eating because I wanted her plate to be full. When the winters came and the heating bill was too high, I wore 3 sweaters and curled under thin blankets while she slept warm because I made sure her room heater stayed on. Every school trip, every uniform, every new book, those came from the coins I saved, from the meals I skipped, from the hours I worked until my body screamed for rest. I told myself it was worth it because she deserved more than I had. I wanted her to walk into classrooms without feeling like she was less than the other children. I wanted her to hold her head high in clothes that fit properly, while mine came from thrift shops. When she wanted piano lessons, I found a way. I cleaned an extra office, stayed later at the factory, and handed the money straight to the teacher. When she wanted a dress for her school dance, I sewed one from pieces of fabric I bought with overtime wages, pretending it was brand new. She grew up thinking life was easier than it was because I hid the struggles from her. She saw food on the table, clothes in her closet, lights on at night, but she never saw the long hours behind it. I shielded her from the reality of poverty because I wanted her to believe she belonged to a better world. And when she got older, she did rise. She went to college, the first in our family to do so, and I paid as much as I could. When the bills became too heavy, I borrowed from relatives, knowing they whispered about me, but I swallowed my pride because her future mattered more. I lived without new shoes for 10 years, but I made sure she had everything she needed to look like she belonged among her classmates. She never asked how. She never saw the nights I came home with swollen feet, the mornings I left while it was still dark, the hands that shook when I counted the few bills left in my purse. She just lived, unaware that my suffering was the ground she walked on. And still, I loved her. Every wrinkle on my face, every scar on my hands, every ache in my body was a story of love written for her. I thought one day she would look back and be proud of her roots. I thought she would see me and say, "My mother gave everything so I could stand tall." That belief carried me through every humiliation I faced at work, every insult when people looked down at me, every time I was called just a cleaner. I told myself it didn't matter, because one day my daughter would honor me. I thought she would carry my sacrifices like a crown, never letting anyone mock where she came from. But I was wrong. The change in my daughter did not happen overnight. It came slowly, like a shadow creeping into the house, until one day it was everywhere. At first, I thought it was just the normal distance children grow into when they become adults. She had new friends, new opportunities, and a new world that was bigger than the one I had built for her. But soon I realized it was not distance, it was shame. The first signs were small, almost easy to miss. She began correcting the way I spoke at gatherings, saying my words were too simple or that I sounded uneducated. When we went to stores together, she asked me not to talk too much because people might stare. She rolled her eyes at my clothes, the same ones I had worn for years while sacrificing everything so she could have new ones. "You should buy something nicer," she would say, not knowing that the money I could have spent on myself had gone to her shoes, her books, her meals. She started introducing me differently to her friends. Instead of proudly saying, "This is my mother," she would just say my name, as if I was someone she barely knew. She left out the stories of how hard I worked for her. She acted as though she had climbed through life on her own, erasing every piece of my sacrifice to paint a cleaner picture of herself. At first, I laughed it off. I told myself she was young, that she didn't understand the value of roots. But the more she moved up in life, the more she wanted to erase me. When she began dating her fiancé, I saw it clearly. She warned me before dinners not to say anything embarrassing. She told me to sit quietly, to smile and nod, as though my presence was a problem she had to manage. One evening, when her fiancé's parents came to visit, she asked me to stay in my room. She said there wasn't enough space at the table, but I knew the truth. She didn't want them to see me in my plain clothes, with my worn hands and tired face. That night, I sat in the dark, listening to the laughter from the dining room, the clinking of glasses, and I felt the wall between us growing higher. She had started to live as if her past didn't exist, as if the nights I worked 2 jobs for her were some shameful story she wanted buried. She pretended she had grown up in comfort, that she had built her success alone. I was no longer the mother who raised her. I was the reminder of a life she wanted to forget. And the worst part was, she made me feel it. Every time she looked at me with those eyes of embarrassment, every time she dismissed me in front of others, every time she spoke to me like I was less, it was like being erased, piece by piece. The bond of love that once held us together had turned into something else. I was not her pride. I was her shame. The day my daughter finally said the words to my face is a day I will never forget, because it was the moment when every sacrifice I had ever made was crushed beneath the weight of her arrogance. It was the week before she was set to marry. I remember coming into the living room while she was on the phone with her fiancé, talking about plans for the rehearsal dinner. I smiled because I thought maybe this was the moment she would tell me what part I would play. Maybe I would be seated next to his parents. Maybe I would get to stand beside her proudly as her mother. But instead, when she hung up the phone, she turned to me with a look I had seen before. The look of annoyance, of disgust, of someone who wanted to hide me away. She sighed and said, "We need to talk." My stomach sank instantly. I sat down, trying to steady myself, and I asked her gently, "What is it, sweetheart?" She crossed her arms, avoiding my eyes for a moment, before finally blurting out the words I had feared, but never thought she would say so bluntly. "You can't meet his parents. You're too low class. You'll ruin everything." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. My heart stopped. I stared at her, thinking I had misheard. "What did you say?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She rolled her eyes and repeated it even harsher. "You don't fit. They're educated, polished, wealthy. You show up with your rough hands, your old clothes, your simple ways. They'll judge me. I don't need that. Just stay away." The words hit me harder than any slap. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had worked themselves raw cleaning floors and scrubbing toilets so she could have her education. The same hands that cooked meals for her when I went hungry. The same hands that tucked her in at night when she was small. And now, those hands were not the mark of sacrifice in her eyes. They were the mark of shame. She looked at me as if I was dirt, as if my very existence was a threat to her future. I tried to speak, to remind her of everything I had done, but the words stuck in my throat. She wasn't listening. She had already turned her face away, as if even looking at me was beneath her. She said, "You'll ruin the image I've built. I've worked too hard to climb out of that background, and I won't let you drag me back down." My chest burned, and tears filled my eyes. I thought of every night I came home exhausted and still found the strength to wash her clothes, to cook her food, to sit by her side when she was sick. I thought of the years I lived without dignity so she could stand with pride. And now, the very child I gave my life for looked at me like I was a stain she needed to hide. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her and ask her how she could forget so easily. But instead, I sat there in silence, my tears sliding down my face while she checked her phone, indifferent. She had no shame. She had no guilt. To her, I was not her mother anymore. I was an obstacle to be removed. That was the moment my heart broke completely. It was not just rejection. It was erasure. She erased my sacrifices. She erased my worth. She erased me. And in that instant, something inside me hardened. For years, I had kept her secrets, protected her from the consequences of her own mistakes, carried the burden of truths that could destroy her image. I stayed silent because I thought it was my duty as a mother. But when she called me low class and told me I would ruin her future, I realized she had already thrown me away. She gave me no dignity, no respect, no place in her life. And if I had nothing left to lose in her eyes, then I had nothing left to protect. That was the moment I decided the silence would end. If she could call me low class after everything I had done for her, then she would face the truth she thought would never surface. She had humiliated me with her cruel words. I would answer her humiliation with the one thing she could never escape, her darkest secret. That night, after she told me I was too low class to meet her in-laws, I went back to my small room and sat alone in the dark. The words kept replaying in my mind over and over, stabbing me deeper each time. "You're too low class. You'll ruin everything." I looked at my hands, the same hands she mocked with her tone, and I saw the lines, the scars, the calluses. They were not signs of shame to me. They were the history of my life, proof that I had worked myself raw so she could live with comfort. Yet in her eyes, they were ugly. They were embarrassing. They were something to hide. I stared at them until my vision blurred with tears. I thought back to the nights when those hands cooked for her after 12 hours of cleaning other people's mess. I thought about how many times I patched her clothes with these fingers so she could look neat while mine remained torn. I remembered all the birthdays I spent working overtime so she could blow out candles on a cake. And now she had taken all of that and reduced me to nothing more than a label: low class. I felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. The daughter I loved more than life itself had humiliated me in the cruelest way. I tried to sleep that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face as she said those words. Cold, detached, ashamed of me. My chest hurt so much that I pressed my hand against it, wondering if I was having a heart attack. But no, it was not sickness. It was heartbreak. I had always believed that love between a mother and child was unbreakable. I thought no matter what the world said about me, my daughter would be my shield. I thought she would say proudly, "My mother gave me everything, and I am proud of her." But instead, she was the one who delivered the deepest cut. That realization left me broken. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the small pile of clothes I owned, and I cried quietly into the night. The tears weren't just sadness. They were grief, like I had lost something I could never get back. But as the hours dragged on, something inside me began to shift. The pain didn't leave, but it started to harden. The more I thought about what she said, the more I realized she had already thrown me away. To her, I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a burden, an obstacle, an embarrassment. That truth hurt more than any insult, but it also gave me clarity. If she saw me as worthless, then what was I protecting her from? For years, I had carried her secrets like stones in my chest. I had held back the truth to keep her image clean. I told myself it was love, that a mother's job was to protect her child even from their own mistakes. But that night, as I wiped my swollen eyes and looked at my cracked hands, I understood something important. She didn't see my silence as love. She saw it as weakness. She thought I would never fight back, never stand up for myself, never remind her who I was. That was when my pain began to turn into something else. It turned into resolve. I told myself that if she could erase me with her cruel words, then I could erase the image she had built on lies. If she could strip me of dignity in front of strangers, then I could strip her of the mask she wore in front of her fiancé and his family. My tears dried on my face, leaving my skin stiff and tight. My body still trembled, but not from sorrow anymore. It trembled with determination. That night, the silence I had carried for decades cracked open, and from that silence, a decision was born. She would feel the humiliation she gave me, and she would feel it not in whispers, but in truth. As I sat there in my room, staring at the ceiling in the silence of the night, one thought began to grow stronger in my mind. She thought she had power over me because she believed I had nothing to fight with. But she had forgotten that mothers always know more than their children realize. She had forgotten that I carried her secrets. For years, I kept quiet about things she had done, convincing myself that it was better to protect her reputation than to expose her truth. I stayed silent when I saw her lies, thinking time would correct her. I swallowed my shame when I discovered the choices she made, telling myself she would grow out of them. But she didn't grow out of them. She built her life on them. And the more successful she looked on the outside, the more rotten I knew the foundation was underneath. I remembered the first time I caught her in a secret. She was in her early 20s, already with her fiancé, but she was still meeting another man in secret. I heard her on the phone one night, whispering words she thought I couldn't hear. I saw her sneak out of the house when she thought I was asleep. I never confronted her directly, but I knew. Later, I even found messages she had printed and thrown in the trash, proof of a relationship she tried to bury. That was the first shadow I carried for her. Then came the second, the money. She had debts that no one knew about. Credit cards maxed out, loans unpaid, bills hidden. She would take letters from the mailbox and tear them up quickly, thinking no one noticed. But I noticed. I picked up pieces from the trash. I saw the names of banks, the overdue amounts. I saw the pattern of someone who lived beyond her means, covering it with lies. And when she began to prepare for her wedding, she lied to her fiancé and his parents about her finances. She told them she had no debts, that she was responsible, that she could contribute to the expenses. But I knew the truth. The truth was, she had leaned on me again and again, taking my money while telling others it was hers. I kept receipts. I kept records. I kept everything, because deep inside, I knew one day the truth would matter. And there was more. She had once been caught at work altering numbers, a small fraud she pretended was just a mistake. But I saw the letter when it came, the warning from her employer. She hid it, burned part of it, but I had already read enough to understand. That was the third shadow I carried. Lies, debts, deceit. These were the things she had buried deep while painting herself as someone perfect. And I carried them silently because I thought it was my duty as her mother. I told myself, better she have a clean name, even if I carry the weight of knowing. But when she looked me in the eyes and called me low class, when she told me I was not good enough to meet her in-laws, she erased the last reason I had to protect her. If she could strip me of dignity after all I had done, then why should I keep her secrets safe? That night, as I thought of every piece of proof I had, my heart grew calmer. I realized that my silence had only protected her arrogance. She believed she was untouchable, but she wasn't. She believed no one could expose her, but I could, and I would, because the truth was no longer a burden for me to carry. It was a weapon. She thought she destroyed me with words, but she had no idea that I had the power to destroy the image she lived for. And the best part was, I didn't need to lie, I didn't need to exaggerate, I didn't need to invent anything. All I needed to do was show what I already knew. She had built her world on deception, and I was the only one who knew exactly where the cracks were. That was her mistake, and that would become her downfall. Once the decision was made in my heart, I knew there was no turning back. My daughter had erased me with her cruel words, and I was going to erase the mask she wore in front of her fiancé and his family. But I also knew this had to be done carefully. A mother's anger can burn hot, but I didn't want to act with anger. I wanted to act with precision. If I shouted her secrets in the street, people could call me bitter. If I confronted her directly, she would scream back, twist the story, and make herself the victim. No, this had to be clean, undeniable, and silent. I would let the truth speak for itself. I began by gathering everything I had kept hidden over the years. The old letters from banks demanding payments. The receipts I had saved, showing that I had covered bills she claimed she paid. The records of money I had given her that she told her fiancé's family came from her own savings. I dug through boxes and drawers, pulling out every piece of paper that carried her lies. I went even deeper, finding the warning letter from her old employer about the financial fraud she had committed. I had tucked it away years ago, telling myself it was just a youthful mistake she would grow past. But now, it was proof. I even found scraps of old text messages, notes she had left behind in the trash, pieces of conversations with the man she had secretly seen while already engaged. Each piece was like a shard of glass, sharp and dangerous, but together they formed the weapon I needed. I laid them all out on the table, one by one, until the picture was clear. Anyone who saw these papers would know exactly who she was. They would know the truth she had buried. They would know the truth she thought no one would ever find. I placed them neatly into an envelope, thick with evidence. As I sealed it, I felt a strange calm. It was not rage. It was not joy. It was justice. For years, I carried her secrets to protect her. Now, I carried them to protect myself. Next came the choice of who would receive it. It could not be her, because she would rip it up, deny it, and continue her charade. No, the envelope had to go to the people who mattered most in her new world, her fiancé's parents. They were proud, strict people who valued honesty and reputation. I had seen the way they looked at me, polite but distant, as if they were already unsure about me. If they saw what was in this envelope, there would be no more doubt. They would know the truth before their son walked into a marriage built on lies. I took out a single sheet of paper and wrote a short note by hand. My handwriting was rough, but my words were steady. This is who you're truly marrying into. You deserve to know before vows are spoken. That was it. No signature, no explanation. The papers would explain themselves. The timing mattered. Too early, and she might find a way to cover it up. Too late, and the wedding might already happen. I decided to send it just days before the ceremony, when everything was already set, when the family's pride was at its highest, when there would be no easy way to hide the scandal. I imagined the moment they would open it, sitting together at their dining table, expecting a quiet evening before the wedding. I imagined their eyes moving over the papers, the way their faces would harden, the silence that would fall as they realized the truth. I imagined their shock, their disgust, their anger. And most of all, I imagined my daughter's face when they confronted her, when the life she built on lies collapsed in front of her guests. That image gave me strength. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control. She had taken my dignity, but I was taking back my power. And I would do it not with shouting, not with bitterness, but with the one thing she could never fight: the truth. When the envelope was finally sealed, I placed it on the table and stared at it for a long time. It was strange how something so small, so simple, could carry the weight of years of silence, sacrifice, and betrayal. That envelope was not just paper. It was my voice, the voice she had silenced when she called me low class. It was the proof that I was not weak, not forgetful, not powerless. I held it in my hands and thought about the journey that brought me here, the long nights of work, the hunger I endured, the dreams I buried so she could live hers. And now, because of her arrogance, all of that had been repaid with humiliation. I felt no guilt sealing her secrets inside. I felt clarity. The truth belonged to the people who needed to know it, and I would deliver it. The next morning, I woke early. I dressed in my plain clothes, the same ones she mocked, and put the envelope in my bag. The sun had not fully risen, and the streets were quiet. As I walked to the post office, the cold air bit at my face, but I welcomed it. For once, I did not feel ashamed of my worn shoes or my rough hands. I felt steady. I was carrying justice. At the counter, the clerk asked where the package was going. I gave the address of her fiancé's parents, my voice calm. I paid extra for confirmation, making sure it would land directly in their hands, with no chance of delay or loss. When the clerk stamped it and placed it in the outgoing box, I watched it leave my possession. For a moment, I felt my chest tighten. Was I really doing this? Was I really exposing my own daughter? But then the memory of her words came back. "You're too low class. You'll ruin everything." The pain of that night burned inside me again, and the doubt disappeared. Yes, I was doing this, because she had left me no choice. Walking home, my steps felt lighter, almost as if the envelope had taken some of the weight off my shoulders. I knew what would happen once they opened it. I pictured her future in-laws sitting at their dining table, curious about the mysterious delivery. I imagined the father opening it, pulling out the stack of papers, scanning the first page. His brows would furrow. His wife would lean closer, her face tightening with each line. They would flip through evidence of debts, of fraud, of lies, of affairs. Page after page would crush the image they thought they knew. And then they would find the note I had written. "This is who you're truly marrying into. You deserve to know before vows are spoken." Simple, clear, undeniable. I imagined the confrontation that would follow. They would call their son into the room, hand him the papers, and watch his world crumble. He would look at my daughter not with love, but with betrayal. He would demand answers, and she would have none. Her mask would be ripped away, not by my hands, but by the truth itself. And all of it would happen without me saying a word. That was the beauty of this delivery. It was silent, precise, and final. The days that followed felt like waiting for a storm you know is coming. I went about my routine quietly, drinking my tea, cleaning my small room, and walking through the neighborhood. People smiled at me as they always did, unaware of what was brewing. But inside, I was steady, because I knew the truth was already moving, already cutting through the lies my daughter had built. And then, just 2 days later, I heard whispers. Relatives began to talk. There was trouble with the wedding. Something had been exposed. Arguments had broken out between the two families. Guests were confused. Some had even been sent home. I stayed silent, listening, nodding, as though I knew nothing. But in my heart, I knew exactly what had happened. The envelope had been opened. The truth had been delivered. And my daughter's world, the one she thought was untouchable, was crumbling just like I knew it would. That was the delivery, not just of paper, but of justice, not just of words, but of consequences. She had told me I was too low class to meet her in-laws. She thought she could silence me, but now her in-laws had met me in the only way that mattered. They had met the truth I carried, and they walked away in disgust, not at me, but at her. The storm broke on the very day of the wedding rehearsal. I was not there, but word reached me quickly because scandals travel faster than silence. Her fiancé's parents had opened the envelope the night before, and what they found inside shook them to their core. They spent hours in their home reading through the evidence, page after page, unable to believe what they were seeing. They had thought my daughter was perfect, the kind of woman who could bring pride to their family name, but instead they were faced with lies, debts, hidden affairs, and deceit. I imagined the silence in that room, the disappointment in their eyes as they realized that their son had nearly married someone who had built her life on deception. By morning, they were furious. They confronted their son first, showing him the papers. He argued at first, defending her, but then, as he flipped through the evidence, his face turned pale. The truth was undeniable. Every receipt, every letter, every message carried her handwriting, her name, her choices. There was no way out of it. By the time they all arrived at the rehearsal hall, the tension was thick enough to suffocate everyone in the room. My daughter walked in smiling, her bridesmaids at her side, still believing she was untouchable. She adjusted her dress, laughed loudly, and acted like a queen about to be crowned. But that smile didn't last. Her fiancé's parents pulled her aside and handed her the very same envelope I had sent. In front of her fiancé, they demanded answers. I heard later that she froze, her face draining of color as she realized what was in their hands. She flipped through the pages quickly, hoping to find a way to dismiss them, but the proof was too solid. Her fiancé looked at her with betrayal, his voice rising as he shouted, "Is this true?" She stammered, tried to lie, tried to twist her way out of it, but every word only made her guilt clearer. Her bridesmaids whispered among themselves, her guests looked confused, and soon the whispers turned into full conversations. Something was wrong, something big. The confrontation grew louder. Her fiancé's father told her she was not welcome in their family. Her fiancé's mother said they would not allow their son to tie his life to a liar. The guests who had gathered for joy were now watching humiliation unfold. My daughter cried, pleaded, begged them to listen, but the more she spoke, the worse it became. Her fiancé tore off the ring he had given her and threw it onto the table, saying he wanted nothing more to do with her. The rehearsal ended in chaos. The families clashed, arguments erupted, and eventually the groom's family left in disgust. The wedding was called off on the spot. By the evening, the news had spread to everyone. Guests who had been ready to attend began canceling. Relatives whispered about the shame. Friends who once envied her lifestyle now laughed behind her back. Her dreams of climbing into a higher social class had collapsed completely, not because of gossip, not because of enemies, but because of her own secrets finally coming to light. And in the middle of it all, she knew who had done it. She knew it was me. That night, she called me over and over again. Her voice messages shifted from rage to desperation. At first, she screamed, "You ruined my life. How could you betray me?" Then, hours later, her tone changed to broken whispers. "Please, Mom. Please help me. I don't know what to do. They've left me. Everyone's laughing at me. Please just talk to me." I listened to them all, sitting in silence in my small room, my hands folded in my lap. I did not answer. She had silenced me when she called me too low class. Now it was her turn to be silenced, left alone with the truth she thought she had buried. The fallout was complete. Her wedding was gone. Her fiancé was gone. Her in-laws walked away in disgust. Her reputation crumbled. And for the first time in her life, she felt the weight of humiliation heavier than I had ever felt it. She had erased me, but in the end, I erased the image she had worked so hard to build. That was justice. After the canceled wedding, life around my daughter changed faster than she ever imagined. The house that had once been full of excitement and plans was now filled with silence, whispers, and shame. She could not escape it. The wedding hall had already been decorated, the food ordered, the guests invited, the music prepared, and now all of it was wasted. People talked, neighbors whispered. Family members who once praised her looked at her with pity or judgment. Every conversation she walked into became quiet. Every glance reminded her that people knew. Her fiancé had cut off all contact, blocking her number, returning her belongings, and leaving her with nothing but broken promises and a broken image. His parents spread the truth among their circle, making sure everyone knew why the wedding had been stopped. It wasn't my word against hers. It was her own proof, the debts, the lies, the affairs that destroyed her. She could not twist the story because the evidence was undeniable. She tried to reach me every day, calls, texts, messages. At first, they were full of rage. "You're evil. You betrayed me. You wanted to ruin me because you were jealous." But when no answer came, her words softened. "Mom, I need you. Please talk to me. Please tell me what to do. I can fix this if you help me." She even came to my door one night, banging and crying, demanding I face her. But I didn't open it. I sat inside, still and calm, listening to her tears. She had made her choice when she told me I was too low class. She had erased me from her life, so I erased myself from her desperate cries. For the first time, she was forced to carry her shame alone. The aftermath stretched into weeks. She lost friends who didn't want to be tied to scandal. She lost invitations to social gatherings. She lost respect in every corner of her world. She had built her identity on climbing higher, on proving she was better, on pretending her roots didn't exist. But now, she was stripped back to what she truly was, a liar exposed. She could not hide it because everyone already knew. For me, the days were different. I woke up without the heavy weight of humiliation pressing down on me. I walked through the neighborhood with my head held high, wearing the same plain clothes she once mocked, but wearing them proudly. People looked at me differently now. They knew what had happened, and though some whispered, others gave me nods of respect. They understood that I had stood up for myself, that I had ended years of silence. I no longer felt ashamed of my rough hands or my simple life. My worth had never been measured in money or clothes. It had always been in truth, sacrifice, and dignity. And now, that dignity was mine again. At night, I sat at my table drinking tea and thought about everything. Did I feel guilty? Number? Did I feel regret? Number. I had protected her for years, and in return, she called me low class and tried to erase me. I had every right to finally stop protecting her and let the truth speak. The aftermath was painful for her, yes, but it was also the lesson she refused to learn any other way. Humiliation was the only teacher she would listen to, and now it was her turn to sit in the silence I once knew. When the dust finally settled, I found myself living in a peace that I had not felt in decades. For years, I had worked myself raw, carrying my daughter on my back, feeding her with my hunger, clothing her with my sacrifice, and giving her everything I never had. I thought those sacrifices would be remembered with gratitude. I thought they would be honored. But instead, she looked at me with disgust, called me low class, and told me I was not good enough to meet her new in-laws. That was the moment she erased me as her mother. But she did not realize that by erasing me, she had also freed me. I no longer felt the need to protect her lies, to carry her secrets, to shield her from the consequences of the life she chose to build. She had taken away my dignity with her words, so I took away her mask with the truth. And now, sitting here, I feel no guilt for what I did. Justice, for me, was never about destroying her life completely. It was about restoring my own dignity. She thought she could bury me in shame, but I showed her that shame belonged to her. The day her in-laws walked away, the day her fiancé tore off the ring and ended everything, was the day I took my place back. Not in her wedding, not in her new world, but in my own heart. I was no longer the mother who bowed her head, who stayed silent while being insulted. I was the mother who acted, who reminded her that truth always comes back. My life is simple now. I live in my small home, with my modest clothes, and I drink tea at my table in peace. Neighbors pass me with nods of respect, not because I am wealthy, not because I wear fine things, but because I stood for myself. And when I look at my hands, the same hands she mocked, I no longer see shame. I see survival. I see strength. I see proof that I lived a life of honesty, while she tried to live a life of lies. Those hands raised her, those hands worked for her, and those same hands sealed the envelope that ended her lies. As for my daughter, she carries her shame now. She avoids the stares, the whispers, the judgment. She feels the weight of being abandoned by the people she wanted most to impress. She called me low class, but in the end, it was not me who stood disgraced. It was her. The very people she wanted to look perfect for now see her for who she truly is. They walked away, not from me, but from her. And that is the greatest justice of all. I do not hate her. My heart will always remember the child she once was, the little girl who held my hand and trusted me. But that girl is gone, and the woman she became made her choices. Choices have consequences, and this was hers. She thought she could silence me with humiliation, but I reminded her that silence has power too. I carried her secrets silently for years, and then, with the same silence, I delivered them to the only people who needed to hear them. That was my revenge, not with shouting, not with screaming, but with truth. And now, I end my story with this thought. She called me low class, but class is not money, clothes, or status. Class is honesty. Class is sacrifice. Class is dignity. I lived it every day of my life. She rejected it, and she lost everything. I sit here now, at peace, because she may have tried to bury me in shame, but I buried her lies in truth. That is my justice. That is my victory. And I will carry it quietly, with pride, until my last breath.